So blessed. Yes, yes. I went to sleep stressed, woke up refreshed. I'm so blessed. Good day, pioneers. I have something really special for you today. Three very talented, passionate, and experienced educators will be discussing with you Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility. And we'll be talking about chapters 1 through 4 today. So to my left, this left, I have Latanya Manson. Down beneath me, I have Candace Wilson. And catty corner to me is Monique Taylor-Gibbs. So I am your host for today, Dr. T, and we're going to go ahead and get this party started. Starting with chapter 1 of White Fragility by Dr. Robin DiAngelo. And this chapter talks about, the chapter is actually titled, The Challenges of Talking to White People About Racism. And one of the first things that she mentions is going to college and taking a diversity course with ethnic authors, but no discussion of racism. And I want to speak with my audience, with my guest hosts today, and find out what's been your experience with that. I know it wasn't talked about when I went to school.
My first experience with diversity, well, I've had African American teachers throughout my whole education, from kindergarten all the way up. But we never talked about race or prejudice or anything like that. I didn't have a class on that until I was in college at Delaware State University, and that's when we really got into it and talked about it. My professor was very in tune and was making sure that we knew and that we understand. So it wasn't until I went to college that I actually had a class that talked about diversity, talked about racism. Yeah, pretty much it.
Definitely. And that there's that difference there between the diversity and the racism. I agree with you. I learned about diversity in college. It wasn't until college that came up, but even still, we weren't talking racism.
Can I, Dr. T, if I can share, I'll have to say my experience was a little bit different. Having prior to desegregation from grades K to 8th, Martin Luther King Elementary School, that was Northeast, Burnett Middle School. I had all Black teachers, and they definitely, race was definitely discussed. It was definitely shared in a way that we were told that, we were great. We can accomplish anything that we want. So for me, it was awareness. And then my parents, oh my God, my parents and family members talked about it. So for me, it was a different experience when desegregation came in and I went to Mount Pleasant Middle and Mount Pleasant High School, where it became some of the things that were discussed, we actually could see them in practice.
That's excellent. And I know the whole reason we wanted to have this discussion was because we come from some different backgrounds. We're all educated women, very accomplished women, but we have different backgrounds. So it's important that we approach this topic from the various lenses. Monique?
So for me, the conversations about race mostly came from home because my experience was a little bit different. So I lived the racism experience, right? Mm-hmm. So for me, being educated in Brandywine School District schools, I remember being in elementary school and just always getting in trouble. Like the smallest thing that I did, K-3, just landed me in the principal's office or, you know, in trouble. And I can remember having to actually receive counseling because, you know, this little Black girl is just acting up. And if not, I will always be indebted to her. Carol Pillsbury at Dolly Road Elementary School decided to have me tested. Right now, the reason why to have me tested, again, it was 3rd grade, I'm not sure, but she decided to have me tested, and that's when they discovered that I could qualify for the gifted and talented program. Mm-hmm. So then they discovered that the behavior was because I was bored to tears, right? And so my mother decided to go ahead. At that time, if you were pegged as being gifted and talented, you had to go to a different school because PS had the gifted and talented program. So then I went to PS. Now, when I was at Dolly Road, I went to school with my friends, all my friends who looked like me. And so going to PS, I was excited because, you know, that was a big middle school where even more of my friends went. But in the gifted and talented program, I was one of two. So then I became, you know, in all of my classes except for reading and math, except for math, I became the only Black girl. 4th grade, there were 2 of us, and her last name then was Sutler, but Dr. Lawrence, who is now the principal of Christiana High School, was in my 4th grade class. In 5th grade, there were 2 of us. Thelmonia Kane, a longtime Red Clay educator, her daughter Brandy Kane was in my 5th grade class. 6th grade, again, there were 3 of us. And the other 2 ladies who were in that class with me are now also educators. So my experience was a little bit different because I always had to think of my Blackness, right? And that is a trauma that I have suffered from kindergarten to even now as a Black school leader. And so I had a few Black teachers. I can remember in elementary school, we had a Black librarian. The exploratory teachers were the Black teachers for me. Music, Mrs. Morton. We had the librarian. I didn't have any Black teachers until I didn't have any at Tally, I don't think, but I had one at Mount Pleasant. And again, the Black teachers were not the content area teachers, right? They were the Miss Stanley for business. And so when I got to college, my first year at UMES, I still didn't have a lot of Black teachers. Most of my experience with Black teachers came from being insane, right? And so just always having to, be in situations where I was the Black girl. And even in those situations where I had other Black girls in my class, I was still the only Black girl from the hood per se. So my experience still was shaped differently from theirs. So so I always have just always been in tune to the differences between the races and, always having to, view myself in that lens.
Yes, I can relate to that very strongly, in that I went to school in North Philadelphia from grades K through 3. And because we lived in Mount Airy, now this is classism, because we lived in Mount Airy, we were kind of looked upon as a family that was doing well, affluent, of sorts.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I was always in the top reading group and the best teacher's pet. My mom was a school teacher in the Philadelphia school district. And at the age of 8, when I was moving into 4th grade, we moved to a suburb right outside of Philadelphia. And for 4th grade, I was put in the low reading group. I went from the high reading group in a Philadelphia school to a low reading group in a suburban school. So that spoke volumes to me, an 8-year-old who didn't have words for such an experience, but
Mhm.
on some levels felt like because I'm Black, I must not be as smart.
Yep. The messages that come so early.
Yes, yes, without words. I did experience overt racism from what we would call, and we're just keeping it 100% real here. What we
Yes.
would call, we all know this term, poor white trash. Okay,
Yes.
we know the term. So they would come right out and call me nigger.
Mhm.
But those who were more affluent knew not to behave that way and knew not to say those kinds of things. So then it was just the subtleties
Mhm.
that take place. But I can say from grades, it took me until 9th grade to make it back to AP classes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
because I just had to build myself up. And that speaks to the process of building yourself up when you're torn down. But even with that, it wasn't until Temple University that I learned that there were important Black people who helped shape this world beyond Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks. And I was floored. I was outraged. You can't, like my whole existence could have been a whole different experience had I known that Black people have been the backbone of this country and thrived for thousands of years in Africa long before, you know, the two people that I had learned about in my formal education.
Absolutely.
I'm so tired of hearing about
Hey,
them.
I call
Dr.
them the Fabulous Five.
Uh-huh.
That's what we call them. And I can remember, you know, being in the classroom, and to what you just said, Dr. Townsend, there was just a point in time when I think it was my last year at Warner, where, you know, the students, you know, you reach a point in the year where the students are tired, teachers are tired, and then everybody's just not being nice. And, you know, my classroom was 90% Black. And so when I saw students just being like not nice to each other, just being mean, I decided to put together like a slideshow, and it was titled Seeing the Me I Want to Be, right? And I think, Dr. Townsend, I've talked to you about this program that I want to start. And so what it was, I basically reached back and showed them like pictures of kings and queens, and we talked about, you know, what happened before slavery, and how, you know, everything that we do in existence can be traced back to our civilization in Africa and other indigenous civilizations. And the one thing that stuck out to me, I never forget it, one of my students looked at me with tears in his eyes. He said, "Well, why don't they teach us this, Miss TG?" And I said, you know, because TG keeps it 100, right?
Yes.
I said, "Why do you think?" And he was like, "If I knew about this, then I would feel better about myself." I said, "And son, and that's why it's not taught."
Wait, TG, I'd like to expand upon what you just said about and having in all three of you guys classrooms, you know, me coming in as a contracted teacher and peeping in and listening to you guys' conversations, that these are one of the things that systematically, the way the system runs, that things that are good for us, somehow they take it out. This is where we can take, like you just did, and then some other small things where we can take it at a next level. They may not have a curriculum per se put into place, but in the morning meetings and the little sit down afternoon sessions, these are opportunities where these situations can be shared. Now, I shared that my situation was, you know, up until 8th grade, K to 8th, I saw all Black teachers. Carol Wright, who was in the Red Clay School District, was my 5th grade teacher, was no joke, coming in with her big afro, bright red lipstick, funky glasses on, pencil skirt, pumps, stockings. I mean, the Black males come in, Mr. Hart, history teacher, smelling good, tie. So when I left Burnett Middle School and went to Mount Pleasant Middle School, it was traumatic. It was traumatic. I'm going from a place where I am comforted. I'm treated with respect. You're in honor classes because that's where you belong. Or, you know, once you got the Mount Pleasant, it was called Talented and Gifted. And having my first year, myself had to take that California Achievement Test 3 times because they didn't believe the test results.
Wow.
And so at the 3rd time, when my mother, her 4'11" comes sashay through the principal's office, you know, for that, like having to take that test 3 times because these people didn't believe that, oh my God, this little Black girl, or sitting in classes where I went from everybody who looks like me to now maybe there's 3 other Blacks in the class, and then maybe those 3 Blacks in the class are looking at me like, what's she doing here? She live in the projects. So you got classes, and, you know, so you have to struggle with that. Like, wait a minute, I didn't come from an environment where, you know, Blacks are looking down upon each other. I came from an environment where we were inclusive, looking out for one another. So leaving that entire environment, I felt resentful. I mean, there was periods where I was like, who these people think they are? And literally would voice my opinion in class, raising my hand because of reading some of the material and finding out, hey, where are we at in these books? Oh, Candace, you be quiet. We'll get to you. We'll get to you. And then those discussions happen with my mother, where my mother would intervene and you know, so
Get them straight.
yeah, get them straight. So basically what I'm saying is that really we're going to have to take it in our own hands. I mean, something simplistic as the cursive writing, you know, they don't do it anymore. So what? We know they need it, teach them. It's the same thing with our history. We know they need it in some forms of fashion, that we give it, you know, not just the students, but our community.
But even in saying that, like when we look at chapter 1, right? And I just came to this realization like last week in talking with one of my colleagues. It was like a light bulb moment. And chapter 1 goes into the fact that white people don't see themselves in racial terms, right? So it goes back to that idea where you have me, a school leader, who always has to think about herself. I mean, down to the point where I'm about to lock my hair, but I had to make sure I do it in a way that would be presentable to them who don't understand, right? And so where I always have to think about my race, they never do. And in not thinking about their race, they don't have to think about the racist things that we go through. So like, so there was a point where this whole idea of racism and racial talks, it triggers the white fragility, right? Because then I have to put myself in a sense where I'm not in this little bubble, and the whole entire infrastructure of the United States is blown to smithereens because United States is steeped in white supremacy. So in order to talk about race, you have to address and identify the white supremacy that goes on. And that's the point of fragility.
I definitely agree with you. And
Yes.
the trickle effect is that a lot of times, and you know, I wore locks for 17 years.
Yes. And they were beautiful.
And thank you. And I'm starting that process again. Yes, ma'am. Yes. What I found was it wasn't white folks who had issues with my locks. A lot of times it was Black folks.
Yes.
You know, we've been so indoctrinated to hate ourselves that we pit ourselves against one another, and white folks don't even have to do the work anymore.
Absolutely. Right. And it's funny that you say that. I just got chills because I can remember when I finished my master's for school leadership, right? Manson, you might laugh at this one. And I went to a person who was a leader, and we were having a conversation about hair, because of course you guys see, you never see my hair out, right? I left the perm I haven't had a perm in over like 15 years. And so the conversation from that school leader, it had nothing to do with, you know, I think the conversation was something like, what do you see I need areas of improvement on to be a school leader, right? It had nothing to do with, you know, talking to people or my toolkit or my professional repertoire. Well, first you got to get those braids out of your hair, because nobody wants anybody sitting with an afro or braids looking like that at their table. That was a conversation. That was a conversation.
Wow.
And when I share this story with people, the Manson, that's the reaction I get from someone who looked like me and who has been so indoctrinated, right? And I won't name drop, but in the same breath, this same person was one of the first people to call and congratulate me when I got this job. And I just had to take it with a grain of salt, because I'm like, and I got the job with my braids in.
There you go.
Thank you. And I always think of Whoopi Goldberg. Whether you agree with her or not, she's very strong and opinionated, but she is who she is. And I just want to be who I am. I know I have gifts and talents. I don't want to, you know, cut down who I am, water down who I am for anybody, because then I might not deliver what God has for me to deliver.
You better say that. You better say that. I always, and it's so funny because I always just envision myself, I always wear my hair up in a bun, but just like that fly, funky, now assistant principal who can wear the blazers, the t-shirts, the wide legs, but still have my J's on and be relatable, right? Yeah. And so I think that this whole white fragility, and you just hit on a perfect point, the racism, it takes place, but we do the bidding as well sometimes.
Exactly. Yes. Exactly.
Yeah. To close out chapter 1, I want to point out that Dr. D'Angelo says most white folks don't want to be viewed as racist because they see the widely accepted definition of racism as people who are mean, immoral, deeply offensive, and it's questioning of one's moral character.
Right.
So, you know, I know a lot of really great white people who have been kind to me, helpful, and they really strive to be good people. They just were born white. And so with that, there are privileges that come with it. And it doesn't make them bad people, but they absolutely benefit from the race in which they were born.
Absolutely.
Right.
But Heather, do you find, or Dr. Townsend, do you find, I know in light of what's been going on, I think we had a little small discussion. I concur, I have some, you know, really good friends, but in light of what has been going on, I have had a flurry of my white friends calling me or texting me, you know, asking what can they do, and what can I do? What can I? And I'm going, okay, Candace, are you okay? I'm thinking like, what in the world is going on? One, if you have to call me and ask me, what can you do?
Well, that's because
I have an entire different perspective.
When they ask you, it's really, most of the time it's because they don't really know what to do. They don't know how to do it. They don't want to say the wrong thing. I have one girlfriend that I went to high school with. We are still cool to this day, like still cool. And to me, she's a white person, and she just white on the outside, and she's black because she's totally different. And she's like, I didn't see, I've never looked at y'all with different colors. I said, all right, now we're going to start that conversation all wrong, because you always knew we was black and you was white. Let's get that right. I said, and so her thing is, I just feel like if I say something, then one person is going to be mad at me. And if I say something else, then somebody else is going to be mad at me. She like, so I just stay quiet so that nobody's upset with me. And so that and I'm like, well, I'm going to need you to take a side. I'm going to need you to take a side on what you feel is right. At this point, that's where we at. We at like what's right and what's wrong.
Right.
And then the other thing is, these are people that know you. Like in my situation, they know me, they know my stance, Black and proud, and I'm not apologetic about it. I'm not, I mean, there's a lot of things I'm not changing to make them comfortable. So I think, or what kind of bothers me is why, and these are some of the, I mean, she kind of touched bases on a lot of stuff. Why do we always have to conform? When are they going to be able to really say, hey, you know what, let's really take an honest look at ourselves. We're going to have to be, irregardless, they're going to be uncomfortable. So that we're always, I feel like, you know, we're tiptoeing around to talk to them so that they feel comfortable.
But that's also touched on, I think, in chapter 4.
Mm-hmm.
And my therapist tells me all the time, like, because the situation I'm in, I am one of now maybe 2 Black people in the building that are not cafeteria staff or custodial workers.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, I understand my purpose and calling, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that can be daunting. And so my therapist, in going through, you know, some situations, was basically like, you are not the teacher. You are not the one to hold the mirror and tell them that they're being racist or that it's racism going on. They know, right? And so, you know, I have a lot of teachers who reach out to me like, how can I change my practice? What can I do? Right? What can I do?
Mm-hmm.
And so I address that. I addressed it, I'm gonna give 2 points, the educational point and the personal point, right? So on the educational point, I just always tell teachers, well, number one, you cannot feel sorry, right? You can empathize, but don't feel sorry, because the minute you feel sorry, then you lose your power to empower your students, right? And so you can't teach them to see the white way, because that is the infrastructure. That is the way.
Yeah,
right?
that's the structure.
And so what you have to do is work in the confines and constructs of your privilege to help them navigate the infrastructure through your eyes. You will never understand what it's like to be segregated against just because of the way you look. You won't. It's just is what it is. But as a teacher, it's your job to empower the students and to make sure that you review your own personal biases. You know, like I think, Manson, the first meeting that you mentioned when we did the white fragility work was, I admitted that I had bias against white female teachers. Yeah. You know, when dealing with especially our Black boys, and that bias came from how my own child was dealt with. So the number one piece of this work is just looking at your own personal biases that you have and addressing them. And, you know, and so now as a leader, I have to address that bias in order to lead, in order to empower teachers instructionally to reach students, all students, no matter what they look like. And on a personal level, because I was involved in programs at school where I was the only, you know, Black girl, my friends, the ones that I call my friends, right? They have reached out to me and they just already know, right? Show me your solidarity, show me your action, show me what you have done. And I'm not saying show me like I'm the,
no, we know what you mean.
I'm the Black person, but don't text me telling me you feel sorry that I have to go through this. Yeah. And then I'm scrolling through your Instagram or I'm scrolling through your Facebook and you're talking about what you bought at Potty Barn last week. You know, so I had friends who, when all of this was going on, texted me, is Nasir okay? Do you need anything? What can we do? Give me some books I can read, TG. Well, they call me Mo, of course, but like I have the friends who I have a friend who sends me $40 a month for reparations, just because that's the weirdest thing ever, right? But in speaking with her, and we had a conversation about reparations, and she didn't really understand what the big hullabaloo was, like how we as a race could ask for these reparations. And so after the conversation, she said, you know what? I'm just gonna pay it forward.
Wow.
And so, you know, the whole, what do we do? In the book, it talks about treading lightly with this, because again, we should not be discussing racism in a manner that puts it all on us and absolves them from addressing the white supremacy that takes place.
Amen. And I was going to say that leads right into chapter 2, which is called Racism and White Supremacy. And she starts off by talking about classism versus racism. And how she grew up poor, but she knew somehow that being poor was better than being Black.
Yes.
Unspoken prejudices, but we do all have them. And I spoke earlier about being from Mount Airy, which was considered a better neighborhood than North Philly. And, you know, so I had that Mount Airy air. I didn't know to not have it. That's the way people around me treated me. And I developed that. And I have recognized in myself the need to look at the errors that I was raised in, the ones that I continued without recognizing. And I'm doing what I need to do, my personal work, right?
Right.
So I see that in white folks as well. You're born into something, you might know it's wrong, you might want to change it, but don't fully have the tools to change it, and you get caught up. So I'm not making excuses for people, but I recognize dynamics, and I think that this definitely, in terms of our healing process, we have to be open to recognizing various dynamics, as uncomfortable as they are, and even when we don't agree.
Absolutely. Something that I have lots of highlights and notes in chapter 2, but it's a whole misunderstanding about racism, right? Racism is a structure, not an event. And I think the issue is that events bring about the talk of racism. And that's where it gets misconstrued, right? Because we don't talk about racism until something happens. Otherwise, we're just, you know, plowing along in the predominantly white infrastructure. And I think it's this chapter where it talks about the system of racism begins with ideology. It becomes the default of the society and is reproduced automatically. A racial group's prejudice is backed by legal authority and institutional control. So this is the system, right? But I also think about the messages that we get, right? So I purchased a house at 21, right? Everyone knows, born and bred, 21st and Jessup, but I purchased a house on the west side of Wilmington, so I still live in the city, right? And so when people find out about me, it's like, oh, you've been promoted in your job and you live here and you've done these things and you have 2 degrees. Why do you still live in a city? And so it's the message that if you live in a certain area, you must be of a certain characteristic. And so the struggle I'm having now, because I do want to move, like, okay, I've been in this house for 19 years, it's time. But the struggle I'm having now is, do I really want that house in the suburbs? Or is that something that was just ingrained in me to have, right? Because I'm not a suburb person. I have had experiences in the suburb and I'm like, it's too quiet out here. I'm just, that's just not me. And so in reading chapter 2, that is a white supremacist idea. That idea of you have to buy that big house and have your white picket fence and live in a certain zip code and live away from certain groupings of people. And for us, the message is we always have to assimilate, right? The biggest arguments I've had It's the discussion of, did segregation actually benefit us?
It did not. It did not.
And that's the question.
I think that is the worst decision we could have ever made.
But even in that argument, and I received a 2-day suspension for this because I started a huge argument in history, right? When as an 11th grader and 12th grader, when they were trying to do choice and redraw district lines, I'm like, guys, they're just doing de facto segregation again. And I wrote a whole paper on it, got in trouble. It was worth it because it's happening. And so the question then is, when you read into chapter 2, it's not that it's that we as people don't have the political prowess, the infrastructure. We don't have the power per se, because when you look at who holds the power, we don't have the power to then go back to successful segregation. And so it's like what are we really doing here, right? What are we really doing? Because we're teaching our kids to live to a white standard. We are there's a ceiling when it comes to excelling. There's ceilings everywhere. And so the question then is, and that's where the discomfort comes in, because to admit that is then to admit that, again, white supremacy rules our nation.
Correct. And two quick points. I noticed that when Latanya and Candace spoke, they spoke about having Black teachers. Mm-hmm. And when you and I spoke, we spoke about not having Black teachers and having trauma.
Yep.
I feel like so many people, and I learned this later on in life, so many people who I encountered who grew up in Black neighborhoods and went to Black schools had such a stronger sense of identity than I
did. Pride. And pride.
And centeredness, because I spent so many years trying to prove that I was a good Black person, not like the ones on the news,
But here's another thing too, though. When you come into environments, I'm gonna use Warner, and I'm gonna use Shortlist for an example, where I met all of you guys, and I was like, oh my God, so grateful by the time I got to high school that I had a strong grounding, because if I did not, sitting in those classrooms where, like I said, 3 or maybe 2 or sometimes 1, like I remember my political science class literally just like throwing a book across the room, because the book was literally had nobody who looked like us. Mm-hmm. So the fact that, having that, and then coming to Warner, meeting the 3 of you guys and Mason at Shortledge, that you all cadence. And Dr. Townsend, I can remember those dreadlocks, like just swinging and just, oh my God, like the strength. And then walking by TG's room, and TG is telling her students, how they're important and how they are loved, and then Manson, Manson gonna jack them up, and then she gonna love them up.
Yep.
But it was like, oh my God, I'm in the right place with these strong, beautiful Black women who, come from all walks of life. And you guys may not know it, but there is many a days that I used to sit outside y'all's classroom with a clipboard taking notes, and just like, wow, this is it. This is where this is where I'm supposed to be. Like these are the teachers that I grew up with, empowering their students, and even empowering, your peers,
Now my shock was when I came to Brandywine Springs with you, Dr. T. I like to die that first year. I was like, yo, what is this?
Yep.
Like the Twilight Zone.
I was like, Dr. T, how are we supposed to, it's real quiet, like the kids are in the halls. It's not a lot going on here. Like, what's it supposed to do? Coming from Shortledge and then at Warner, and then I left the district and went to Christina. I was at Stubbs. So that was still, I'm around all my peoples all the time. And then when I went back to Red Clay and they was like, all right, you at Brandywine Springs, I was like,
why?
Okay, I'm gonna just get here and I'm gonna ass. I'm gonna work this out because I gotta fill this out.
Yeah.
How to say, and coming from and being around, like Candace said, coming around and being around strong African American educators, it's like, all right, I got this. I know what to do. I got this. And then I call them my pink friends. When my pink friends say certain things, I'm like, I'm gonna let you handle that because I know I'm gonna let you be great. And when you really need me, then call me. Because I'm gonna sit over here and I'm gonna do me and I'm gonna wait because I know that this ain't get ready work. Like being around African American teachers, because I've always had African American principals. It wasn't until I went to AI Middle is when I seen my first white principal. I ain't never known. Listen, everybody was always black everywhere I went.
Yeah.
Even when I went to Brandywine Springs, she was still black, and so it was like, wow, it was an awakening moment for me. And I was 40? I'm 44, so I was like 40 then.
Yeah, I'm so glad you had that experience. That's how my school, Brandywine Springs, is the type of school I went to. But I was one of 4 Black students when I went to the school, and it's disheartening that 30 years later, in fact, 40 years later, Brandywine Springs, you still have 2-3 teachers that do Black History Month. And Manson, I would walk up in there with my African garb. Even though I cut my locks, I still had braids. I still had cultural styles every second. I haven't had a perm since I was 21. So my point of being there was, there's more to this than just uplifting Black children.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
All people need to see educated, Black, articulate, successful Black people and understand that this is how we can move and navigate. And Candace, like you were saying, we were an inspiration. We've been traumatized and we can still go on to be an inspiration to someone. And there's someone who needs to hear that today. There's someone who needs to know that today, that your trauma is not the reason why you don't go on to be what you were born onto this earth to be. You keep going, keep pressing through. And Monique, I wanted to speak to what you said. Yes, there is that subtle message, and Dr. D'Angelo says it as well. You stop saying, I don't want to be around Black people, and you start saying, I want to get to a good neighborhood.
Yeah.
Good means non-Black. Good means non-Black. But then she challenges folks and says, you don't want to be around Black people because they're dangerous. But what about you? You're just as dangerous. Trayvon Martin was killed in a gated community.
Yes.
White folks are dangerous to us.
Yes.
And express that.
And I think I was watching a historical context. I think it was Farrakhan or Malcolm X. My memory escapes me. But the conversation was, Blacks historically and on a grand scale have never amassed the amount of violence and degradation towards whites that then has come the way to Blacks from whites, right? And so even in all of that, right, I was thinking back, this year was a huge transition for me. First of all, I was, promoted to be a school leader, but I was also assigned to a school that I knew had issues, right? This school was in an uproar when they redrew district lines years ago. And I was working at Warner, and I had people from the PTA calling me because they wanted me to speak about how violent the students were at Warner based on an article that I did where they took one little line.
Yes,
right?
I remember that.
And
Ridiculous.
one little line and took it completely out of context. So, you know, when our superintendent was like, this is the school where you are, huh? Are you sure? Like, I'm being punked, right? Just tell me I don't have the job. You don't have to play with me. He's like, no, I'm sending you there. And so that, and even the shift of me coming from Warner to AI was difficult, because I think when we work among us, it's less stressful because we don't have to switch, right? And so I'm also reading another article about why do we have to code switch?
That's
Why?
what I'm saying. Why?
And
We
so,
shouldn't have to.
I have been challenged by my mentor to go into this year without code switching, right?
Yes.
Talk how you talk, walk how you walk, love on
Exactly.
them babies how you love on them, because that is, and that trauma of not being able to be authentically us, that is trauma in and of itself.
Yes.
That white people don't even have to understand. Perfect example. The school that I work in now is nestled in the center of a community, right? So because I'm a city girl and I only go to suburbs for certain purposes, right? If somebody invites me to their house or whatever, I did not even know that this community existed, right? I think I had only been there once when our basketball team played at elementary school. And so there was one day where I went to go to work, and there was a county cop sitting like right in front of the neighborhood. So I went all the way around. Now, mind you, there's 4 schools in this area. And so I get in, I apologize to my principal for being late. And he was like, oh, no, you're okay. I said, yeah, I had to take the long way. He's like, why didn't you just come through the neighborhood? And I looked at him and I was like, yeah, these are the suburbs. And it was a county cop. And I didn't feel like it today. And he was like, what? And I really had to walk him through my fear and trepidation of driving through a white neighborhood that I was already unfamiliar with, even with the GPS on. And, you know, he goes, I never really thought about that. And I said, and so let me use this as a teachable moment. So now, how do you think our students feel who look like me, that come from the city and drive through this neighborhood and understand already as teenagers how unattainable this is? Because even me as a 42-year-old woman, those houses are unattainable to me in my mind, right? And so that right there is daily trauma to our students. So I think chapter 4 talks about a sense of belonging, right?
Yes.
White people always belong, but we always have to fit in.
I don't. I make
and
them.
that is trauma. What you say, man?
Go ahead, man.
I make them. They. When I walk in the building, if I'm in the supermarket, I'm anywhere, I'm speaking. You're going
absolutely.
To that.
Yes.
I'm going to. I have this way of, you're not gonna make me feel uncomfortable. You gonna
absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm in a building and where I'm at now, and we have teachers there that at first I didn't know, and then you kind of, when you get to know people, like, oh, okay. Now I'm getting ready. I'm definitely getting ready to tweak you. I'm getting ready to make you want to be. You're gonna get to know me, and I'm gonna get to know you, and you're gonna get to know me as not the aggressive person in the building. Like, we're gonna smile. Because I am. They call me the bubbly one in the building because I'm always smiling. I'm like, no, let's do this bulletin board, and we can do this assembly, and we can do this. And so when I come in the room, and especially if I come in the room and I find that they're quiet, as soon as I walk in, you know they was talking, and then when you walk in, they get quiet. Hey, what y'all talking about? You know, that's just me, because I need you. I'm not gonna feel uncomfortable in my skin. I'm gonna be okay.
Yeah.
So you need to get used to, at any moment, Miss Manson might walk in this room. So y'all know how she gonna be when she gets in here and things like that. So.
And I think that's one of your greatest strengths, Manson. I want to say, you know, again, you talked about your upbringing, your teachers, but just the fact that you stand on your square, at all times. You're grounded in who you are, and that is a gift to the world, because so many of us, and I would say I'm grounded, and I'm certainly strong, and lots of positive things, but I still can take from you and learn from you and watch you move and groove and grow in that. So I'm real thankful that you're a part of this conversation, for each of you for being a part of this conversation. We jumped to chapter 4, but I want to jump. We're going to do 3 and 4 simultaneously, because chapter 3 talks about racism after the civil rights movement. And we kind of went here a little bit where it's like, okay, Martin Luther King marched, we're good. Like, blacks and whites can go to school together, we're good. Okay, we had Barack Obama as president, so what are you talking about? Like, you know, there are no issues. But meanwhile, there's still this subtle us versus them. And these are Dr. D'Angelo's words. The us versus them, that's the coded language. Urban, underprivileged, sketchy, good schools and good neighborhoods, diverse. Well, I work in a diverse community, so I can't be racist.
Right.
And I mean, I catch myself using these words too, because it's like, once a word is in pop culture, we all use it.
Yep. It's just like the teaching terms that, you know, RI, MI, SEL. If you're not a teacher, then you don't understand those things. But one of the things that this chapter discusses is the increase of, so pre-civil rights movement, right? It was the social norm to be racist and divisive and violent for whites, right? It was socially acceptable. Media plays a huge part in all of these transitions, because in chapter 3, it talks about how when that stuff started being televised, then it was, I'm not racist, because then that's where that definition of racism comes from. But you can say, I'm not racist, I have a black friend, in the same breath as, you know, oh, I would never move to that neighborhood, or be careful when you go, don't go to that neighborhood at night. And I've had to tell, you know, my colleagues, y'all don't want to come where I live at night, I don't want to come where you live either at night.
Amen.
And it had, and they're like, but why? We live in the suburbs. This black woman doesn't want to come to where you live at night because of the violence that could come to me. You come to my neighborhood at night, somebody's just going to think you're looking for something, and violence may not befall you. But I would never come to where you live at night because I don't belong. And in me not belonging, there are consequences to that. And so when the consequences of racism increased, that's when it became more behind the door. But my argument to that is, again, with this segregation really worked, my argument to that is the racism got worse, because now we have to pretend that we're not racist, but still do racist things.
Because now it's become that you mentioned a lot, talking about how racism has become adaptable. What I was actually, after chapter 3, to be honest, guys, I started really getting annoyed and aggravated, because, you know, all these different forms she talks about racism, you know, the aversive, subtle, it just, to me, it's all under the same window. So it's like at each phase, it's watered down and it's watered down, and to the point that I think it's more, and I think she talks about it in the chapter, I think it's more, in my opinion, that it's more divisive now. Because before it was overt, it was in your face, it was blatant. Now it's, like I said, everything has been watered down, it's adaptable. You got the millennials, even with my son, sometimes I talk to him, he goes, yeah, Mom, well, it's not, everything is fine, it's not like that. And I have to kind of bring him back and go, okay, well, here's this example. So I think the times have not changed. I just based on a lot, it's gotten worse. And really, after I really started getting, you know, a little annoyed and aggravated, and had to like kind of take a step back. I mean, TJ, you talk about you in therapy, so am I. For
forget
seriously.
Yeah, forget stimulus package. I think all Black people should have access to mental health for free in America. For free. because
well, I ain't get none of that either. But I agree.
Because
Between
the sheer like you have to like people have to understand your sheer existence. The fact that you are here on earth offends some people. That is deep. That is so deep. And you know, me being at the school where I am now, you know, when we work in schools where kids look like us, you hear kids throwing around like, oh, this teacher's racist. The racism takes place between teacher and student. And then we have to go back to that definition of racism, right? Where I always would have to tell my kids, like, is she being racist, or do you feel that she shouldn't have said that to you because of her race, right? And so then the conversation, you know, when I was at Warner differed very greatly from the conversations when I was at AI and when I was at Skyline. But what I'm seeing now is the students, like the fruits of the parents who live in this bubble of shelteredness, right?
yes,
And even that term sheltered, right? Where
and
are you being
entitled.
sheltered from? And so I'm seeing those fruits. Like I'm having students come and talk to me about why doesn't my parents think it's okay to have Black friends? Or, you know, when all of the protests started, I had a student who, you know, well, I got in trouble. I was arguing with my parents, but then I have to talk to my Black friends. Like, Miss CG, I don't understand what to do. And so now what we're going to have is a generation of people who are stuck and confused because, like Manson said, they feel like they have to pick a side, but they've grown up in a generation, in a culture where they've been so sheltered that they don't know what to do in choosing. They don't understand what that choosing means, because everything has a consequence, right? Whether it be good or bad. And so chapter 4 for me was enlightening, because as I pointed to back in the beginning, they don't have to think about it until they have to think about it.
Right.
And that so, chapter 4 just talks about, you know, it just gives us insight to what that statement means.
But here goes T. When is, I mean, you talked about, I mean, it's, you know, all throughout the book, she kind of talks about, you know, people being uncomfortable. But the way I look at it, and to cap off what Manson was saying too, that I'm going to walk in my own space, my own shine, always have, always will. So that, excuse me as a Black woman, if all of this stuff that I have to deal with, or every day we walk out the door, when I've always called them pink people. When are you going to be uncomfortable at some point in time in order for it to be that we all come together? They're going to have to be uncomfortable, because according to them, but wait a minute, according to them, they're superior, they know, et cetera, we know otherwise. At some point, they're going to have to come to the table and honestly do the work. They're going to have to come and do the work. In the meantime, we still, because I agree, I have my own personal biases, but we cannot fix them. We can't fix them. We can't fix them. I feel like right now, all of my energy has to be put into, I'm sorry, the people who look like me, because we still have some work to do. They're gonna have to come to the table. They're gonna have to come to the table. And I mean, I think TG, you said earlier that your therapist or somebody told you that you can't, you know, you can't be the be all for everybody, you know? I'm just grateful that we're having this conversation. Like, I'm having this conversation with, you know, intelligent Black women, but it's a struggle.
It absolutely
it
is.
really is a struggle.
I think it is one conversation at a time, like this, Candace. I think a white woman writing a book called White Fragility is a step in the right direction. It's
Exactly.
it's not the total package, but I know several
Right.
people who are willing to buy the book. I know my school is doing the book study this upcoming year, and it's one person at a time, and we're not going to solve all of this. Some people will never be changed.
Yes.
I want to point out, and we are coming to a close of this conversation, but history shows race wasn't even an issue at all until what was it, the 1600s with the Spanish Inquisition.
When you came here
And they wanted to war against religion, but the Spanish couldn't tell who was who based on religion. So then they decided to start race, race as the discussion of who was superior over inferior. So we're talking a relatively new, when we think of the history of the world, 500 years is relatively new phenomenon, but it's really based in greed. Like the whole color conversation is ridiculous on some levels, on many levels, but we're here. We're here, and we have to keep fighting. So in closing, I want to quickly go back to chapter 2, which made some interesting statements. It said, who are we outside of white supremacy? Because our whole lives, we're all in our 40s and 50s. It's been our whole life. It's been a 500-year phenomenon. So who are we? We are visionaries, and we are going to think about how our world can be a better place, right? So we know right now, teachers, 82% white, TV owners, 93%, book publishers, 90%, news owners, 85%, music producers, 95% white, college professors, 84%, national football owners, 97%. I'm going to put out there what I would like to see outside of white supremacy is 25%. We talk about 4 races, the red, yellow, black, and white. How about 25% each?
Yep.
In those major industries.
Yeah.
Well, it can be done. I personally believe it can be done. But, with the barriers put in place has prevented us, it can be done. But it's just, I don't know, it's daunting. I'm just grateful.
Task, but these conversations is how we're going to get it done, one conversation at a time. I thank you, ladies, for being.
Thank you. You ladies look amazing.
This was chapters 1 through 4. Next week, we're going to tackle 5 through 8. We thank all of our viewers. We hope that you found this conversation enlightening, and we look forward to continuing to grow into a better world with you and alongside you. Thank you all.
All right.
Thank you.